chair. To my left is Councilman Jones, who is also one of the sponsors of the resolution. And to my far left is Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, who's also the sponsor of one of the resolutions we're hearing. And to my right is Councilwoman Gim and Councilman Allen Dom. And so we will be hearing today, public hearing on testimony on resolutions 180847 and resolution 190089. I recognize the presence of a quorum, and at this point, Mr. Clerk, would you please read the title of Resolution 180847?
Resolution 180847, a resolution authorizing the Committee on Aging to hold hearings to examine emergency protocols that ensure the safety of senior citizens residing in traditional community high-rises.
Thank you. At this point, Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, if you would like to have any comments, as you are the author of this resolution.
I thank you very, very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to all of those who are in attendance around this issue which impacts seniors. Thank you for allowing me to provide brief opening remarks on Resolution 180847, which authorized this committee to hold hearings on emergency protocols for senior citizens residing in traditional community high-rises. The resolution was introduced after council members, including Councilman Jones and myself, where this particular building resides, were alerted to an emergency situation at the Pavilion Residences located at 3901 Conshohocken Avenue. These residences advertise themselves as, I quote, a pet-friendly Section 8 tax credit community for seniors, end quote. Most of the residents are senior citizens. According to the seniors, based on several dozen calls to my office, the pavilion operated without power for at least 2 days in September 2018 due to an owner-related issue. Residents indicated that they were not informed of the severity of the problem, nor were they kept up to date about the progress of repairs. They were quite frankly left in the dark. Residents told us that they were unable to quickly leave the building due to the outage impact on the elevator. Residents also told us that no comprehensive wellness checks were undertaken to assess the health of residents. Most concerning and most alarming, it appears as if the residents operated without power for several days before anyone in the city was notified of this issue. That's based on our preliminary homework. Thanks to the quick intervention of a number of city agencies and officers, power was restored and the seniors were supported during this very challenging period. On behalf of the seniors in those offices, we want to take the opportunity to thank the Office of Emergency Management, the Department of License and Inspection, and the Fire Department for your extraordinary public service efforts during this emergency situation impacting one of the two most vulnerable among us, seniors. While it appears that no seniors suffered long-term harm because of this incident, it has caused Councilman Jones, our staff to re-examine the responsibilities of government, the responsibilities of landlords during an emergency, particularly landlords operating high rises and landlords serving seniors. We need to know the following. When are owners, based on protocols or regulations, required to notify tenants about a power outage caused by their own systems? Are owners required to notify the city when power outages occur? And when situations like this arise, what resources should be provided to tenants by landlords or by our city government? Councilman Jones and I look forward to hearing the testimony of the administration and the Senior Law Center here today, and we expect that this hearing will give us a better insight as to what we should do and must do as a government to protect the most vulnerable among us, seniors. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilwoman, thank you very, very much. Councilmember Jones?
Yeah,
One second. I do want to recognize Councilmember Green being present with us, one of the members of the Aging Committee, so thank you.
Yeah, I just want to thank the author of the bill, Ms. Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown, for raising this issue to the point where we're having hearings. In the 4th District where this occurred, we have the distinction of having some of the highest numbers of assisted living facilities, senior facilities in the city. And this is not an isolated instance. It is a recurring instance where, for one reason or another, owners of buildings who may have financed these buildings decades ago have not kept up with their ability to take care of maintenance. And so on occasion, they kick the maintenance can down the road, to the chagrin of our seniors, to the potential of risking a catastrophe. The councilwoman does not like to point out individuals, and she made it very clear about that, but Kathy Richardson was one of the individuals who was on site. In my staff, I had Ms. Crystal Tan, who is the senior citizen whisperer in our office, and if you want to get under her bad side, you want to get her angry, abuse a senior and see how she takes it very personally, and I'm glad she does. So I want to thank them for being on the spot. Amin Brown was a volunteer who took generators over to the facility, ran extension cords so that people on oxygen, people were, it makes me mad. People that were on walkers, Mr. Chairman, were on 12 flights up and couldn't operate flashlights, trying to make their way down. And this is risking a catastrophe. So again, I want to thank the author of this bill, Councilwoman Brown, and bring to the attention of the public that we need to, not just in the 4th District, but everywhere, check on our seniors, see how they're living, and make sure that in the 4th quarter of their life, they should not be subjected to this kind of hazard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Jones, thank you very much. And I would have to say, just in passing, we can't check on our seniors enough. That's a very good point you made, because there's always some help they may need, whether it's an emergency or it's bad weather or whatever. If you're a friend or a relative of a senior citizen, check in on them, because it would mean a lot. And you know what? It might just brighten their day. Some senior recently told me, my day starts if someone just says hello to me. I really appreciate it. So that little hello, that little how you doing, can go a great deal in helping someone overcome some difficulties. And at this point, will the clerk read the first 2 witnesses on panel 1? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm a little new at this chairmanship thing. I don't see all the lights. Councilman Dom, I apologize.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had I don't know if we have the answers, but did this failure for 2 days have anything to do with PICO, or was it a building failure?
Our homework tells us that it had to do with the building failure.
Building failure.
Yes.
And was this and did this building have a backup generator?
Yes, that's what failed. The original generator failed, and they ran cables and backup from another building, which violates all kinds of BOCA codes, and then kicked the can down the road. And then when that one finally failed, were nowhere to be found in the building when the incident occurred.
So let me just make sure I understand. The building had a source of power that failed. The building's backup generator also failed?
Correct.
Okay, and that's supposed to be inspected, the backup generator.
Say it again,
I
Councilman.
think they're supposed to have inspections on those backup generators.
Which is another part of the reason the councilwoman held these hearings.
I could be wrong, but I think
there's a failure to go around. There's an owner who should have invested. There's a department that probably should have caught this before it happened. There is the fact that when we pay these rents or let the seniors pay these rents, there should be a higher, or at least as high, standard of inspection, particularly because they're elderly.
This building falls under, you get federal monies? From
Yes.
And then the other question I have is, most properties like this, the building managers have a list of who has a dog, who has a cat, who's over the age of 60, who needs assistance, who's on oxygen. In every building I'm familiar with, there's a list in the manager's office, so when an emergency occurs, those are the people that get the immediate attention.
The problem, Councilman, there were no managers on site to find where that list was. So safety checks were done by volunteers. They went door to door. Not only did they check on people, and your staff is to be commended for that, because it was absolutely dark. But not only that, we wound up having to feed them lunches, and because some people just could not come down the steps. And emergency management is to be applauded for being right on that to make sure that the essentials were covered. But all of these things fall under management. All of these things fall under adequate housing being provided. And so there was, but for the most vulnerable. Good point, Councilman.
Councilmember Brown, something further?
No, thank you.
Would the clerk please call the first two witnesses?
The first panel consists of Katira McCabe, Sarah Kaiser, Noel Foysen, and Charles Johnson.
They're ready.
Okay. Whoever wants to go first, that would be just fine. I thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kateria McCabe. I'm the Director of Veterans, Kinship Care, and Tenant Rights at Senior Law Center. Councilman Taubenberger and members of the Committee on Aging, thank you for this opportunity to allow Senior Law Center's perspective on the improvement of emergency protocols for units renting primarily or wholly to seniors or the disabled. Senior Law Center is an independent nonprofit organization that protects the rights of older Pennsylvanians. We're the only nonprofit organization dedicated to providing legal protection to Pennsylvania senior citizens, and we're the primary provider of legal services for older tenants in Philadelphia. We provide free legal assistance to thousands of seniors each year, including elders facing housing crisis. We also run the only legal helpline geared toward Pennsylvania seniors, reaching over all Pennsylvanians in 67 counties on civil areas affecting their lives, including landlord-tenant issues. I would just like to first briefly discuss a few statistics regarding the senior population in Philadelphia to just give a sense of the community that could benefit from improved emergency protocols. Among the 10 largest cities in the United States, Philadelphia has one of the highest percentage of seniors and the second highest percentage of seniors in poverty. 31% of non-institutionalized seniors in Philadelphia live in rental housing units, and 42% are disabled. An estimated 28,259 rental housing units in Philadelphia are occupied by seniors who are living alone, which amounts to 10% of all rental housing units in the city. We encourage and fully support the establishment of improved emergency protocols that more adequately ensure the safety of seniors in traditional community high-rises. The unique challenges presented in emergency situations do not require us to accept the increased suffering of groups for which we can anticipate that our current protocols are not sufficient. An electricity outage, for instance, should not prevent seniors from being able to quickly leave a high-rise building to reach safety in an emergency. When such a building caters wholly or predominantly to senior tenants, almost half of whom may be disabled, the inability of at least the majority of tenants to use stairwells or similar ambulatory means to quickly and safely exit the building is undoubtedly foreseeable. The higher number of rental housing units in Philadelphia in which seniors live alone further demonstrates that many seniors do not live with someone who can assist them during an emergency. Improved emergency protocols instituted by the University of California, Berkeley as part of a recent civil class action settlement may be instructive in this area. Although these measures were meant to better address the emergency needs of the university students with disabilities, they can provide a template for the development of emergency protocols for all people with disabilities and seniors who may face similar obstacles in these situations. Similar to that required of the university, owners or managers of high-rise buildings that rent primarily to seniors or people with disabilities should at the very least be required to develop emergency protocols that formally and explicitly account for the needs of these groups. For seniors and others that may have mobility impairments, an inventory of evacuation chairs would have significant practicality in an emergency situation. Training building staff on assistance procedures geared to the unique needs of these groups exemplifies another way to improve the efficiency of emergency protocols while maintaining safety. However, improved emergency protocols must go beyond merely addressing the number of individuals unable to use stairs. People with disabilities, such as those who may be blind or deaf, may find it difficult to assess information necessary for a quick and safe exit. Additional signage or maps that point specifically to the evacuation routes for seniors or people with disabilities represents one potential way to address this concern. People with disabilities may also face communication challenges when their high-rise building provides only traditional means for the reporting of incidents to emergency services. Essential aspects of improved emergency protocols may also be inferred from a recent line of structural reform litigation centered on the adequacy of emergency initiatives cities currently have in place. Protocols should explicitly anticipate the needs of seniors and people with disabilities, and communication with these groups should occur before, during, and after emergency situations. Outside experts may also be helpful in identifying deficiencies and even improved protocols. Along these lines, the participation of seniors and people with disabilities in the development process may help to adapt future protocols and bolster their effectiveness. I think we can all agree that seniors and people with disabilities represent a huge section of our city's population and that only need but deserve significantly improved emergency protocols. I thank you all for your attention to this important issue and for the opportunity to testify.
Please state your name for the record.
Good afternoon, Chairman Taubenberger and members of the Committee on Aging. My name is Sarah Kaiser, and I'm the Legislative Affairs Manager for the Department of Licenses and Inspections. Today, I'm here to provide testimony on Resolution Number 180847 regarding emergency protocols that ensure the safety of senior citizens residing in high-rises. I'd like to thank the committee for their interest in this important issue and for inviting L&I to be part of the discussion. In September of 2018, the department was made aware of a power outage at a high-rise structure housing seniors located at 3901 Conshohocken Avenue. L&I, along with other departments, responded to the outage, and ultimately power was restored shortly thereafter. As the city's enforcement agency, the Department of Licenses and Inspections is dedicated to improving the safety of its citizens through the implementation and enforcement of the city's building, maintenance, and safety codes. Adopting modern codes is critical to ensure that structures within the city are constructed and maintained to the highest standards. These codes have been written to provide redundant safety factors within structures, especially within high-rises. Within the last year, legislation has been enacted which allows the department to adopt the 2018 edition of the International Codes, as published by the International Code Council, along with previously adopted local amendments. Prior to this legislation, the department was enforcing the 2009 edition of the International Codes. The adoption of these updated codes is essential in providing necessary safety measures in both new and existing structures. Furthermore, the Philadelphia Fire Code requires that all high-rise structures obtain a license. This license is required to ensure appropriate levels of safety are maintained in existing residential and non-residential high-rise structures. All licensed high-rises are subject to an annual inspection to ensure all required safety measures are in place and are functional. Lastly, it is evident that in the event of a serious incident like the one we saw in September, a multi-departmental response is crucial. The Department of Licenses and Inspections, along with the Office of Emergency Management and the Philadelphia Fire Department, worked together to ensure that power was restored to the building, and until that was done, wellness checks were performed, food and water was distributed, and a fire watch was established and monitored. The department realizes that incidents like this are rare, but they create a high risk, especially when the population that is affected includes seniors. The department is dedicated to continued enforcement of the codes and annual inspections of these structures to minimize the likelihood of a similar event in the future. Thank you for the opportunity to provide the department's testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilman Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, thank you for being responsive to the pavilion incident, I'm gonna call it. What I would like to know is, what are the salient differences between the 09 version of the code and the current 18 version of the code? And would those changes have caught what happened in the building?
I believe what would have caught what happened was the annual inspection, that the building is required to have secondary power, and the annual inspection should catch that. In this case, the building had not obtained a license, and we issued a violation for that, and they're currently in court for that reason. So the license that they're required to obtain would trigger an annual inspection, which would have caught that.
Hence, has the building been inspected?
It has since the incident. We had inspectors on site that day, but they're currently in court for the violation.
How many
involving that.
violations were discovered at the building?
I
in the
don't know. I
inspection?
can look into that.
Can you provide that to the chair and members of the committee? And what is, and I'm gonna pass the mic, but what is the threshold? So that we walk a tightrope, if you would. When we send you out, our intentions aren't to make people homeless, because that is an unintended consequence when you see egregious violations that have cause for concern to the degree that you want to vacate the property. However, it is important for us not to miss backup generators that weren't backing up. And so we need to get a list of what those thresholds are. Like, at what point do you say enough is enough, we're going to close it down? And that would be important for us to have that kind of understanding, because I don't mind slaps on the wrist. I don't mind us working with buildings in order to get up to code, Councilman Dom, but there is a point at which we have to say enough is enough. If we've given you enough time to correct these and you have not been responsive, I need to know where those lines are.
Well, after we send the building to municipal court, that would be the court's decision of if it was enough or if we would give them a chance to resolve the issue.
Ms. Kaiser, point of information, could we have the actual violations for this particular case so we could see? Because I think what Councilman Jones has said, that this would give us a great understanding of where that threshold. Nobody wants to make anybody homeless, but on the other hand, you don't want to have someone residing in an area that is totally unsafe. And I do have also one other question, as it indicates the generator was tested, and how was that tested? I mean, did they actually start it up, or did they just look at it and say, well, it looks pretty good, it should start? Or did they start it up as part of the test procedure?
Do you want to? Yeah. Sure.
Please state your name for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is Ralph DePietro, Deputy Commissioner with the Department of License and Inspection. A couple things I thought, if I can, explain a little bit. The building in question actually was running on emergency power when we got there. So basically, high-rise buildings are required to have a standby or an emergency power source to power necessary life and fire safety systems in the event of a power outage. Now, those are really intended for short term, a couple hours at most. They're typically done by generators on site, most normally diesel-powered generators. And in fact, in this particular incident, I believe we became notified of it around 2:30 in the afternoon. Inspectors were dispatched immediately. In fact, Inspector Mark Crawford is with me here today. He was the inspector that responded on behalf of the department. Inspector Crawford, upon arriving, did find the building running on emergency power, but as I said, that generator is really only intended for a short period of time.
Well, excuse me, point of information, on this particular matter, did that generator go on at all, or did it not go on?
It was running, according
It
to
was
the
running.
field reports, it was running, but here and again, these are typically equipped with what we call a day tank, which may carry several hundred gallons of diesel fuel.
Sure.
You're only going to get a short period of time. And these are, again,
How long was it running, approximately?
don't know because we didn't find out. Now, we found out about it on the 14th, around 2:30. Our original report was this was going on for some time, maybe upwards of 2 days. So I don't really know how long the generator itself was running. That's certainly not the intended operation. Now, these are big, giant diesel engines, can run for hours, but that's not the intent. The intent is, again...
No, correct,
short
but
term.
if provided with enough fuel, they can run for hours.
Exactly.
If necessary. And I think in this case, because that's, I think, one of the big failures was the fact that the diesel stopped running or never ran to begin with. And, well, you said it did run, so the question is then how long did it run?
Right. From in fact, we have a very similar incident currently going on right now at Jefferson Hospital. If you've driven down around that area, you'll see some very large tanks, some large generators. There was an accident that caused a temporary power outage, but in those cases, because they're hospitals, the generators are designed far above the code requirements.
In the case you just brought up, are those generators there now because they were called in, or were they on site to back up?
Both. So with respect to both 3901 Conshohocken and actually any high-rise building, they're required to have an on-site emergency power source.
Correct.
Most buildings will do this through a generator. Typically a roof-mounted, sometimes it's mounted in a basement, but it's an on-site generator. Now, you can certainly supplement that, and it's smart to do so, especially if there's going to be a long-range outage, because no generator is really intended to run that long. You have to refill it. It's not safe to do that while it's running or hot, so they'll bring in temporary generators, and that's sort of what we were faced with. Now, let me just, if I may say, between the time the department was notified and we arrived on site with our partners from OEM and fire, there were about several hours before temporary power was restored. The building had emergency power and primary power to some extent from the temporary source. So normally folks will do this, buildings will do this with an on-site generator that's tested every year. In fact, as part of our high-rise inspection, we're going to obtain reports to show that it was tested. The code sort of spells out how you do that. There's requirements from the fire code and the NFPA standards that say how the loads have to be tested, how the generators have to be tested, and those are given to us as a certification from a qualified entity.
Thank you. Councilman Don?
Yeah, I had some questions I wanted to ask. I'm trying to understand, it sounds like you responded on a Friday afternoon, basically, and it was out for 48 hours, 2 days before that.
Correct. We were told the generator was running, the building power went down a day or two before.
What caused the original outage?
I don't know. I'm not sure what actually.
Have we done any
caused it.
kind of investigation with the owner to find out what happened? What did they replace in the building to get the power back?
My recollection was that at the time, and still to this day, I don't know what the actual cause of the incident was, simply that building power went down and there was a fear that the life safety systems were impacted, fire alarm and stuff. Now, these things, to be fair, the idea is that, to Councilman Jones's question, there really is no reporting time when something like this happens. The code doesn't specify that necessarily. If a building loses primary power, meaning no power, then, of course, the building is unfit, but there's no time that says, hey, you have to notify the Department of License and Inspection within X amount of hours. Now, if a fire safety system's down, you're to notify the fire department right away. So if a sprinkler system goes down, a fire alarm system goes down. In this particular incident, again, as I said, when we arrived there, the building was on emergency power and the generator was powering those loads. So
Well,
they
let me
weren't
just-
technically,
Let me make sure I understand. The power went out 2 days before we responded. We don't know what occurred, why it happened, and we don't know what equipment was replaced.
let me be clear, I don't know. I don't know that it isn't known. But
Right.
I don't know.
Right. And then they had an emergency generator there, but of course it's a smaller capacity generator, maybe just to run the elevators or whatever. And that did work?
Correct. The emergency generator did kick on, and it did power the fire and life safety loads.
And is there a requirement from a licensing and inspection on an inspection of emergency generators, by the way, on an annual basis?
Yeah, so each year, if you have emergency or standby power systems, you have to test and certify them every year. Same as with your sprinkler system, same as your alarm system.
But most people that have emergency generators test them every month from 30 to 45 minutes, to my knowledge. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. That's both a functional test. These are diesel generators, so
Right.
the diesel engine, so you want to run them.
Right, because you can hear them, they're pretty loud when they go on.
Yeah, you tend to know if you live anywhere near one that run, and
Right.
the fumes and such. But the actual certification is a yearly process.
And so, in your opinion, is this an isolated situation, of an unusual situation, or is this happening a lot in the city?
Well, it's funny. I wouldn't go so far to say it's an isolated situation. It seemed to be a bit of a perfect storm of things going on. But then again, the incident recently at the hospital couldn't have accounted for that. A steam line being hit, electrical power going down. So these things do happen. As Ms. Kaiser mentioned, we consider these sorts of buildings low incident but high impact. We inspect them every year. The incidents tend to be rare, but if there is one, the potential impact is very high, and particularly one where the occupants are elderly or impaired, have mobility impairments.
And since this is getting federal funds, and is this managed through PHA?
HUD,
HUD? It's managed through HUD?
HUD.
And are they doing their own inspections because they're getting federal money at making sure that that money is utilized the right way?
I don't know, sir. I assume that they are, but I don't know that.
And would it make sense for us to get our legislators, if possible, in federal government to look at this as a requirement when you do senior housing, that you have backup generators for senior housing that would accommodate all aspects that seniors need, not just elevators, but emergency electric and power for oxygen and so forth, and it might require them to increase the amount in order to make sure those requirements are met.
Yeah, I think one of the things you might want to look at, we could consider looking at, is the way hospitals are handled. They have a much higher, you can imagine in a hospital, folks are impaired for lots of reasons. They're unconscious, they're under sedation, they're being operated on. So there's a whole different reporting mechanism and inspection mechanism for those. Now, the interesting thing is a bunch of seniors can move into a residential high-rise, and it's an R2, a residential 2, right, from the building code perspective. The same as any condo, Rittenhouse Square, anywhere else you might see. The difference is those folks can very much be much more impaired by health issues, by mobility issues. So the net effect is, even though it's residential, and we look at it like residential, these folks are in a little bit of a different position because they can't self-evacuate. Hospitals are constructed with the idea that you can never possibly evacuate them. They're made with what we call fire areas, so you can move residents, patients, from one location to another, and they could still be safe in place. The idea of moving folks that are under sedation, under some kind of hospital care, it's unlikely. So the hospitals build that in. We don't do that with residences, and I think what you saw here is that sort of hole in the code, if you would, exposed, where it's a residence like you or I may live in, but the fact that folks age, and today they're perfectly mobile and tomorrow they're bedridden, the code doesn't really account for that in a residential setting.
Yeah, is there any way we can find out what actually occurred and why it was down for 48 hours?
I'm sure there is, and what I'll do is when I go back, I'll get that information if someone else doesn't have it.
So, point of information, if I may?
Sure.
There was an underground cable that was in disrepair. They used a apartment across the street to help establish a temporary connection. Greenbrier, I think it is. Temporary patches become permanent solutions if you don't make people do a real fix. It's like riding a donut tire intended to get to a gas station.
Who's they? Pico or who would?
No, the owners of the building were able to do a temporary repair under an underground cable that went too long. And then the generators in question failed. So they patched it, they responded, but then, this capital improvement took too long and the other system failed. So what's also important is they stayed in the dark from approximately 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. That is, that's a lengthy point of time. And to today, I would suspect that underground cable is still only patched. So it's not if it's going to fail again, it's a question of when will it fail again. So I understand you have a city responsibility, but that HUD thing, I think, is the most important part of your testimony to me, is to make sure because during that time, they never missed a rent payment from HUD. I'm sorry.
Quick point of information. Is it required on your inspection to, review of this incident that you have to determine what the cause is of the original blackout?
Typically, no. What L&I
No?
will do is sort of document the deficiency, and that's the correction. So
Well,
what'll
that could
happen
be
is...
very vague.
Yeah, the idea about it, it's much the same with sort of construction accidents. We're really looking to see, is the building safe? Is there further risk? We don't necessarily get into the cause of the accident. And this sort of thing, our involvement is to document the condition that's deficient and then have them bring in
I
experts.
can see that in many instances, but I cannot see it when it's power. Power is very, very important for a whole host of things. Your heat system doesn't work. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and in a hospital, of course, that's a different situation entirely, but people's lives are literally at stake within moments. So, having the understanding and having it documented why the power went down to begin with is particularly important in today's society, in today's technology. Having power documented why it went off. I see the reasoning for some other things. I get that, but when it comes to power, that's everything. Councilwoman Reynolds Brown?
I would hope that the court action may ultimately reveal the why. So we may have time, there may be a lot of time that lapsed between now and then. First, I want to acknowledge and underscore Councilman Jones' observation. The fact that you three departments worked like an orchestra is commendable. Too often we hear complaints about government. This is an instance where my office, who was heavy on the scene, Councilman Jones' office, who made their presence known, reached out, and you all came together like a song, and that needs to be really, really, really acknowledged and not underplayed.
Yes.
Please, thank you. And so our goal is not to point fingers, but to figure out where the gap is so that never does another incident, and I would respectfully disagree with my colleague, this was a crisis, okay? Because normal people who have mobility would be freaked out of their minds to go 2 hours without dark, let alone 8 with seniors and some of those disabilities. So our goal is to not point fingers around this incident, but to fill the gaps, identify the gaps, so that we don't have a deja vu of this particular type of instance going forward. And so my question is, are building owners required to show their licenses? Is that stipulated in the code that it's a requirement? Like you go in doctor's offices and you go in law offices and dentist offices, it's required that they show their credentials. Are landlords and property owners required to do that?
Yeah, in essence, the administrative code does require licenses to be displayed. And certainly in a large building like that, it'd be more problematic if it was a rental license of a single-family dwelling. Mm-hmm. You can imagine there's no place to display that. And what we do as an alternative is we make sure we put that information on our website so folks can actually see it. Because more often than not, when those kinds of, as I said, sort of low incident but high-risk buildings, the reason we require a license, the reason this legislative body required the license initially was because we wanted to do regular programmatic inspections. So we try to tell folks, before you even move into a building like that, make sure they're licensed, because the license is a real good indicator of whether A, they're compliant, of course, and B, whether they're getting inspections.
And so are you at liberty to say, or do you know, and maybe, let me not answer with the question, do you know what the actual violation is or was that is now sitting in court?
Yeah, the violation in court currently is the failure to obtain the high-rise license.
Failure to obtain a high-rise license.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And if I may, to answer the question, at the original response on the 14th, Inspector Crawford issued 14 violations.
Is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
Those include providing certifications, and certifications, to the point is, once a system has been inoperable or down for a period of time, will very often require a licensed professional to come in and evaluate to make sure it's working. Now, again, this doesn't get to the sort of cause of it, but it will get to, yes, it's working now and it's in compliance with the code. So some of those violations were to provide those reports.
Okay. And then I also want to underscore that never do we want to put a rope around landlords' necks when it comes to violations, and now they have to close down the building and therefore put out seniors. Providing technical assistance sometimes to help them get to code so that we can keep those seniors in the homes, I believe would be a more favorable, attractive remedy. Just helping them get it right and get in order with regards to compliance with rules and regulations. So I want that to be on the record as well. But thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you, Councilman.
Councilmember, thank you very much. I don't disappear yet. I have one quick question. I know. Well, no, the gentleman was about to get out of his chair. I could recognize that. And just a real quick question. Could this committee be apprised of the outcome in court, how this finally resolves itself?
Absolutely.
I think it could be helpful for other things and potential legislation down the lane. I think it's very important.
Yes, sir. We're happy to share whatever information that folks need to consider.
Councilmember Dunn?
Yeah, I just want to make sure, I don't know if you know the answer. To my knowledge, when you have a problem like this, you call out PICO, and they handle the wires under the street, and they bring the power to the building. So you can't, even as a building owner, touch that. So my question, I really want to know what happened here, because if it wasn't done I like to know the background as to what happened here, because what I don't want to see happen is us start putting in new laws that affects everybody because we had one bad situation. I'd like to understand what that situation is.
Absolutely. Understood.
Thank you. I can only tell you that because I've had several situations where I've had to wait, and PICO's good, but I've had to wait 4 weeks, whatever, for them to take care of the electric in the ground. And I had a power failure, by the way, in one of our properties, and I was on the phone every half hour, even at midnight till 6 a.m., to get them out there, and they did a good job. But look, it's technical and it's hard, but it took them about 8 hours, and they resolved it. But it's most owners, when this happens, they go ballistic trying to help their tenants because they don't want this to happen. Thank you.
Understood.
Sure. Good afternoon, Chair Taubenberger and all members of the Committee on Aging. I'm Noelle Foysen, Deputy Director of the Philadelphia Office of Emergency Management, OEM. I am before you today to provide testimony for resolution number 180847. This resolution authorizes the Committee on Aging to hold public hearings to look at emergency protocols that ensure the safety of vulnerable populations, in this case senior citizens, residing in traditional community high-rise complexes. I want to start by thanking you for your time and recognition of looking towards ways of improving the safety of our residents. This is a principle of OEM, which constantly and consistently seeks ways to improve public safety coordination among city departments and external partners, along with building resilience and increasing the welfare of our neighbors. The response that prompted this resolution is an example of striving towards improvement. Our office is tasked by the city, in part, to safeguard citizens when emergencies occur. On September 14, 2018, OEM was notified of a 12-story apartment building housing several hundred people who were a vulnerable population, senior citizens. Electrical power serving the complex had been out for 2 days. We reacted, responding to the 3900 block of Conshohocken Avenue, and contacted our partners from the Red Cross, Salvation Army, and SEPTA to help aid and assist with such things as food, comfort, and tending to any medical concerns of residents. When the council resolution for this hearing states the high-rise advertises itself as a pet-friendly Section 8 tax credit community for adults 62 and the disabled. Not having power to a complex that serves a large population of seniors, pets, and the disabled is a cause for concern alone when an outage affects people's refrigerators, medical equipment, and elevators. If an emergency should cause the structure to be evacuated, the chance for a negative outcome increases. An example relating to this response is there was no red flag raised by the property management over the potential issues relating to the outage, which would have prompted earlier attention on safety concerns. If there is a need, OEM opens shelters for displaced residents until they can find shelter, whether that be through their own resources like renter's insurance or with assistance from property management. A temporary shelter is less than ideal for this type of senior population, where there are cots on floors of Philadelphia public schools and access to food, medicine, power to medical devices, and travel to doctor's appointments as a concern. Our office appreciates your time and for you allowing us to provide information for this resolution. Thank you. I would be happy to respond to questions.
I do have one question, Ms. Foysen. Is there anywhere in the code that it is required, although not necessary in this case, that there be fire drills every so often, like once a year, or?
Yeah, I'm actually less familiar with the code
Okay.
requirements. Our
If you don't know,
office
that's all right.
doesn't handle that. Does someone else want to?
All right, well, we'll let you speak to that
Yes, sir.
when we call in. So actually, Deputy Chief Johnson,
Yes, good
the
afternoon.
floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Taubenberger, members of council, members of the Committee on Aging. I'm Deputy Chief Charles W. Johnson within the Fire Prevention Division of the Philadelphia Fire Department. I'm here to testify with regards to Resolution 180847, sponsored by Council Members Reynolds Brown and Jones, which authorizes the Committee on Aging to hold public hearings to examine emergency protocols that ensure the safety of senior citizens residing in traditional community high-rises. I want to highlight the incident which brought us to this point now. On Friday, September 14, 2018, at 3:13 p.m., a dispatch for a single engine and ladder company to respond to 3901 Conshohocken Avenue, Pavilion Apartments, for inside wires had occurred. Inside wires response criteria includes sparking outlets, flickering lights, the smell of wires burning, or power outage within a residential dwelling. Upon arriving and during the investigation, the companies were informed that the Pavilion Apartments, a senior living center, had been without power for over 48 hours. Due to the highly populated nature of the building, 296 units, of which 292 were occupied, the initial companies began requesting additional resources to assist with the mitigation process and to tend to the needs of the occupants. The requested resources included an additional engine and ladder company, a battalion chief, a deputy chief, 2 community action teams, CAT 1 and CAT 2, the Office of Emergency Management, Department of License and Inspections, 2 members of the Fire Marshal's Office, 2 emergency medical services officers, 6 medic units, 2 second alarm response vehicles, the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, Red Paws, and 2 SEPTA buses. 3 wellness teams consisting of an officer, firefighter, and paramedic were placed in service to check every elevator, floor, and apartment for occupants. The SEPTA buses were used as temporary shelters for occupants to rest and rehabilitate, as well as to be evaluated and monitored by EMS personnel within. The on-scene electrical contractor reported at 6:36 p.m. that complete power restoration should be accomplished by 9 p.m., and at 7:51 p.m., full power had been restored to the apartment complex. The Philadelphia Fire Department's protocols for an incident of this magnitude ensures that a complete assessment of the nature and scope is evaluated and addressed. There was a need to account for all occupants, address the EMS needs, evaluate the displacement issues, both short and long term, evaluate the resources needed to mitigate the incident, and reassess until the mitigation process was complete. Due to the large quantity of resources that were needed, appropriate measures were implemented to ensure interagency coordination. I thank you for inviting me to provide information for this resolution, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilman Jones?
First of all, I want to reiterate what the author of this bill said. You guys are rock stars, and this is not the first time. There was I don't know alarms, but a fire at 63rd and I'm gonna say Nassau that devastated the building. All of you guys were out there in freezing temperatures, assisting the residents. So again, big structure, aging structure. I don't know the investigation post-fire, but if we can prevent these things by proper inspections and holding people to reasonable accommodations, and I use those terms specifically. You mentioned that there should be a list of individuals who are infirmed or ambulatory, or so that everybody knows what apartment. And is that the standard for our multi-unit structures today? Like when you come on the scene, is there a list of apartments that says, all right, these people are able-bodied, they can get down those steps? We have somebody on the 5th floor that has a walker and may not be able to come down and navigate the steps because the elevator's gone. How do we make those determinations? Anyone?
I can't speak to if it's in the code or not, but I will say that as soon as we respond to a scene, that's the first thing that we're looking for from the property management is a full listing of everyone that lives in that building, if there is any access and functional needs, any certain medical concerns that we need to be aware of.
Councilman Don, may I prevail upon your expertise in this matter and ask, is that commonplace, mandatory, or, you know?
It should be commonplace and mandatory among most residential and commercial property managers because they know who their residents or tenants are.
That's my next step.
So we need to make it mandatory because you have a responsibility that I couldn't bear, which is to make decisions on the spot about where you're going, and to contain, but also to rescue. And if somebody's on oxygen and can't get down a flight of steps or blind, in one case, a person was blind and couldn't navigate everything, it's a lot easier if you know of the list of the 200 units, these 10 are priority to do a safety check. And I think we might want to consider, or have you consider, if that is the kind of legislation that might be helpful to you in those kinds of circumstances.
So all high-rise buildings have to have an approved evacuation plan. And one of the things that we suggest, I'm not sure if it's a code violation not to have it, but a list of those occupants that are disabled and what is the plan for them. So it has to be approved through our fire code unit within the Philadelphia Fire. Yes, sir, within our Philadelphia Fire Department.
Okay.
And that approval process is good for 10 years. One of the things that was mentioned is the use group. This particular building is a R2, so it doesn't have all those additional mandatory things that college or university or a hospital would have. Pretty much what we're looking at is an apartment building that just so happen to have seniors in it. You understand? So, so it's an R2 use group. So if there could be some sort of addendum or adjustment to that, where we recognize this as an official senior living area,
Understood.
then maybe we could enhance the use group to include.
Makes
So
so much
currently,
sense.
because it's just a high-rise R2 use group, annually, it has to complete a fire evacuation drill, but just by the employees, not
Really?
by the occupants.
What?
It's just a high-rise. It's a residential high-rise.
Those are called naturally occurring retirement communities that happen just through osmosis of people aging in place.
Yes, sir.
Got it.
So that goes to my, and just a point of order real quick.
Oh, you're good.
That goes to my question that I had earlier, that you have to have an annual evacuation. Yeah, first I have to have an evacuation plan that's approved by the fire department. Is that correct?
That's
Or-
correct.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. You have to have an evacuation plan that's certified through the fire code unit of the Philadelphia Fire Department, and it's good for 10 years.
Okay.
Or unless the owners change or the use
Sure,
changes.
okay.
Yes.
That's understandable. But the actual drill itself is only then for employees and never for the actual residents.
Because of the use group. That's affirmative.
Are there any, is there anywhere in the code where it demands that at least one fire evacuation drill be done a year? In fact, I think in this building, we do at least 2 a year, I
Well,
think.
it is, again, because of the use group, it's to be done annually by the employees.
Okay.
Now, it is code for every occupant to have a copy of the approved evacuation plan. So all occupants should have a copy of the evacuation plan and know what to do when there is an emergency.
Probably wouldn't be a bad idea from time to time to actually have a plan and implement it, because you could find out things for the residents themselves. I mean, how difficult can that be to do it once a year, just to see if the thing works, if the plan actually works, or where's the difficulty? Or Mrs. Jones, you know, on floor 5, who needs a walker, can someone actually help her out? You know, I mean, that's why you have these drills, so when you really need it, it works and saves lives. Councilwoman Reynolds Brown?
Yes. As we go down this road, I am going to lean on Councilman Dobb, as Councilman Jones has already done so, to figure out how we can reasonably fill in what look like gaps and do it in a way that's responsible and not onerous to landlords. To the Office of Emergency Management, can you share some of the emergency protocols that are required for nursing homes but not traditional high-rises? And are apartment buildings required to keep a list of persons with disabilities?
Councilwoman, it's like you read my mind, because I was actually thinking this is actually a huge gap for our office, or these apartment buildings that are not licensed like a personal care home or a nursing home, but they do have a high population of senior citizens living in them. And so a nursing home is actually regulated by the state, and they have a lot of requirements that they have to do around evacuation and having an emergency plan and communicating that to their residents, that just an apartment building that's an R2 does not have to do. And so it's a huge gap for our office. We maintain a lot of data on properties across the city. This just shows up as just a regular apartment building. There's no additional information for it right now in the data set that we would have access to.
I see. Are traditional high-rises required to communicate with your office in case of an emergency? What might those protocols be, if any? I mean, there may not be any, and that's not...
I'm not aware of any, but I can definitely look into that and get back to you on that, but I'm not aware of any.
Okay. Because I think part of our, we're still trying to gather our findings around this type of circumstance, and the findings typically will yield potential remedies or resolutions so that we don't have to cross this particular bridge again.
But I'll definitely look into that.
That's one of the purposes for the hearing. What special challenges exist for the evacuation of a building with seniors and the disabled? How does the fire department manage those challenges? For example, I have here what's called an evacuation chair, and I should probably
Spare
share
chair?
that.
Yeah, we have spare chairs.
And so, shall I assume that evacuation protocols for seniors and the disabled would differ dramatically from those of us not in that circumstance? Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's fair to say.
Okay.
And you know, you have a variety of incidents that can occur. So you may have a fire scenario versus one like we experienced on Friday, September the 14th, where it was a power outage, where we can take our time and assess each individual, get them to the exterior, and get them the EMS care that they need. When there's a fire scenario, we have a process where we may have to shelter in place, where we can protect individuals on the floor, have full communication while we mitigate the incident.
Wow.
So there's a lot of different things that come into. Yes.
The work you all do is amazing. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
It's amazingly important, because you never hope to be in that circumstance. I think that covers all the questions I have for this panel. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo my colleagues' support of the great work you all did in this situation. I have a question. It sounds to me like the issue here is that the emergency generator for this application didn't have enough power to do what the normal power would do, which is the case in many regular buildings. The emergency generators are put in there just for hallway lights and maybe the elevators, okay? And not for the interior apartments. So I guess my question is, and I'm not sure how the money would work on this, but if there are emergency generators that could provide the power in the units, could provide the people ability to plug in for oxygen, could do all these things versus having to get them out of the building, which sounds to me like the solution versus having to deal with getting people out of a building. So the question I have is, do we have any information on buildings that have full-blown emergency generators, right? And there are many buildings that do this. Let me give you an example. If Comcast goes down, don't tell me they don't have a generator to power that building, okay? It's an issue of cost. And since a lot of this money is coming from, I'm not sure, but it looks like the federal government subsidizes, we should really get on board with the federal government and say to them, you know what, for senior housing, maybe you reclassify it as a hospital, whatever, and maybe we need a full-blown generator that does all the services, so you don't have to deal with the evacuations, you don't have to deal with all those emergencies, and people can still stay in their home if there's a power failure, because there will be another power failure in the future. We know that. So maybe it's the issue to me is the size of the generator, a small generator that's not going to do the job versus a large generator that would cover the whole property. So I'm just making that statement because I think that is the solution. The question is how it gets paid for, and if we can use the federal government to it, that's great. There was one other thought I had just sitting here, and that is, in these cases sometimes, I mean, look at what happened on Sansom Street between 13th and Broad. The building called 123 South Broad has no power. They have a huge generator outside there, huge, powering that building. I'm sure insurance is paying for that. So one of my thoughts was, in this case, why wouldn't the owner call in a third-party supplier for a generator that's large enough to power the building and see if his insurance would cover it? I'm just throwing out those ideas for you. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're quite welcome. And Deputy Chief Johnson, another question. In your testimony, you had said that the power was off for about 48 hours.
That was what was reported to the first companies that arrived
Really?
at 313, yes.
And during that time, how long do you think that emergency generator was working?
I'm not sure.
Or was that fixed, as Councilman Jones had said, through this circuitous way around underneath the street, which was maybe illegal, actually?
I don't know the legalities of it and wouldn't cop to it if I did.
Yeah.
But there were a number of people there, official and not official, that were just trying to make seniors safe.
Yeah. So,
And that's what happened.
and Chairman Taubenberger, and that's what our job was to do.
Sure.
Is to account for all the occupants, get them to the exterior,
Sure.
get them the EMS requirements that they needed, and ensure that the right individuals were called to deal with the situation.
I mean, it's my understanding this happened in September.
Yes, sir.
Which the temperatures are very tolerable. Might be a little too hot, maybe not, but it's, if you're going to have this kind of a situation, it's really not a bad time. But 48 hours is totally really unacceptable. And suppose it were in the winter.
Yes.
When it was really cold out. You couldn't get, the heat wouldn't work because you need electrical power to get the heat to go on, no matter what your source of heat is.
With regards to the Philadelphia Fire Department, anytime this happens, it's a bad time for it to happen. Hot, cold.
Yeah. Now, one last question for you, Deputy Chief, and that would be, was this ever identified before the 48 hours that they're out of power? I mean, or how did this get to your attention where eventually they had all the...
Well, it got to our attention that they had a full-blown power outage on Friday, September the 14th. But when I did my research, the day before, there was just a partial outage identified to one unoccupied unit that was supposedly being handled by building management. So it wasn't until the next day that they called in to let us know they had a full
In
count.
your opinion, was there any way that the city could have been notified ahead of time that the power is down and we have all these seniors living there?
So
vulnerable
one of
people?
the things that would really enhance this type of situation being mitigated as expeditiously as possible is if all the occupants knew that they don't have to wait for building management. You can call 911, we'll get out there, and we can heighten it. We can let them know about the emergency nature of having the power out for a half an hour.
Right, okay.
So once again, once it was identified as such, and the Philadelphia Fire Department got out there, we made sure that we called the necessary resources to mitigate and to tend to the care of the occupants. Once again, the thing that really would have made a difference is if we was just called earlier.
Right. Any other questions?
For the Senior Law Center.
Senior Law Center. But before this panel goes, I want to say I thank you for the cooperation that you have all showed as city agencies. I think it should be noted that we did things correct on our end, at least, and we're doing things even better because, and continue to do better, because of our committee and Councilwoman Jones and Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown. I mean, this is what we do, and from this we can learn that henceforth. That's why I'd like to ask how this finally ends up in the court. If you could please let this committee know how this all works out, because this worked out, but it could have been terribly wrong, where you could have had a blizzard going on. You know, it could have been awful, and to prepare for that is then to deal with saving lives and making lives better. Yes, question.
Yes. I want to always try to see what other municipalities are doing in terms of best practices around any type of situation or circumstance of this type. And you mentioned in your testimony that of your suggestion or recommendation that we look at the University of California.
Yes, and what I was planning to do is follow up to get their protocol if council would be interested.
No, not if. Yes, we are.
Okay,
We're
absolutely.
always looking to see how other cities are doing, particularly when we find ourselves in the same circumstance.
I'd be happy
so
to
we
follow up with
absolutely
that protocol.
would be interested in that material. And so one circumstance that always troubles me about seniors is that many of them are isolated, and as Councilman Jones said, just asking about them matters. What does the Senior Law Center do with regards to communicating with seniors who don't have a computer? You know, for those of us who say, well, there's the internet, trash that, because we're talking about folks who are 70, 80, 90, 100 years old, if they're so blessed to get there. How do we stay in touch with seniors? How do we keep them informed? What do we do for those who are in the twilight of their lives and want to feel safe and not necessarily taken care of, but at least to feel safe in their own circumstances? What does the Senior Law Center along those lines? For example, is there a regular communication with the senior citizen centers in the city where seniors go to have company and that kind of thing? I'm just curious to know, what is the level of communication with those who are in that milestone of their lives?
Certainly, and we, as you're aware, know that a lot of seniors do not have computers, and they may not go to the free library to access communication through the internet. So what we do is we have 7 clinics in the community, and then we also provide community education at senior centers and other places where seniors gather, so that we can have the word spread about a host of topics.
And those clinics they're 10 councilmatic districts, so there are 3 districts that are not so lucky to have a senior citizen clinic. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say, but while we don't have clinics all over, they're in various parts of the city, including North, West, as well as West Oak Lane, and we also do community education throughout the city.
Okay, all right. And so what are the linkages with L&I, Office of Emergency Shelter, the Fire Department, on matters that impact seniors? And so the bigger question is, too often we as general professionals operate in silos. And to the extent that we can create some glue and connectedness with entities who are all in this same business of taking care of this particular constituency, they are better served. And so I'm curious to know, might there be any existing current, what I call SOP, standard operating procedures, where you are linking any city departments at all, given the important work that you do at the Senior Law Center?
I can't say that we have linked with these departments on this particular issue, but Senior Law Center does sit on a number of task force to best give the best practices for our constituents. And I'd be happy certainly to connect with regards to this one and add that to suggested topics when we go out and do community education, as well as potentially posters at the senior centers.
Sure.
So that the seniors
Sure.
will be better informed.
Okay, that's encouraging. I'm one, though, who wants to standardize practices. And so I'm looking to see how we can make those type of relationships a standard operating procedure that's in place long after we're gone.
Absolutely.
You follow me? So that's why I'm asking those series of questions. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Councilwoman, thank you. One point of clarification from my questioning. I'd asked for the report coming back from the Court of Common Pleas as it relates to what happened here, but in thinking about that, the matter before the court is actually whether they had a license or not. Maybe what I would like, if it's possible between your departments, is there going to be some sort of final report on why we got here and what was the cause really of the disruption of power? I mean, is that possible to obtain that? From either fire department's perspective or L&I's perspective, or? Because we got here because of something failed. And to understand that failure better, we could make our rules and regulations better, so this doesn't ever happen again.
We would typically have the owner provide documentation about what occurred and the steps that were taken to remedy.
Has that been provided to L&I?
You know, no. Not,
Like, if they don't get the license, they're certainly not going to give you a report. Is that required? Did they give you the report? I mean, is that in an ordinance that says you must give a report?
No, so typically,
Yeah, please talk in the microphone.
Ralph DePietro, License and Inspection. There's two real requirements. The first is a certification that the system is working, it's operable. That's something that's turned in every year, and we pick those up as part of the emergency, the annual inspection. With respect to cause, that's a little bit unusual. We don't typically ask for that. We want to know what was fixed. So that may require a permit to do repairs. It may be providing some kind of engineering behind
Well,
that.
because the enormity of the building, I mean, that's a lot of people there.
Well,
We should learn from it. I mean, because like I had said, it happened in a September night, and yes, it's inconvenient, it's not good. It could threaten certain lives, certain vulnerable lives. But had that happened in January or February in adverse weather conditions, it could have been an absolute calamity. I mean, of record proportions.
yeah, certainly, and I think the key is, and I think Councilman Dom sort of referenced this, part of that is determining what sort of went wrong. If this is really something, for example, and I'm not suggesting it was, that PICO was sort of responsible for, that would make it a little bit, well, I mean, if it's an underground,
Okay.
if it's underground service lines and PICO's responsible to maintain them, it could have been that. I think what we need to do is find out exactly what the cause was, and then we can determine, because typically, for example, if this turned out that they had to replace a generator, I don't know that that's what happened here, but if they did,
Right.
there's permits required for that. So what we do in response is say, you need to have an engineer come in, design the system, get a permit, and then we come out and inspect it to make sure it's been installed per the engineer's design.
when-
That's all dependent on actually what happened.
Okay. When we leave here, it's always been a tradition at the call of the chair, and there are some open items, and maybe we ought to have at least PICO bring information to us, maybe not in a formal hearing, but certainly by letter, and indicating like what went wrong with this, because I'm one to believe that we learn from these things and we make life better. And if we don't do that, we're shirking our responsibilities as legislators and as far as the departments are concerned as well, because we want to make things better. When there's an accident of any sort in the federal government, whether it involves trucks or airplanes or ships, it's studied so it doesn't happen again. And I truly believe in many cases, as far as safety is concerned on a federal level, traditionally has averted a lot of real bad situations because we learned from the previous ones. It's an American tradition, I would think. That's something we ought to do as well. No other questions, and is there anyone here? Thank you, panel. Oh, point.
Sorry. I just have one last question, Mr. Chairman. Have we spoken to the owner of this property and find out their side of the story?
Point of information, too many times,
So he's on.
to nausea. Yeah, he's non-responsive.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I want to thank you again for your cooperation, and if there's anyone else that would like to testify on Resolution 180847, please come forward, or we will go on to our next resolution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See the young lady right there? Crystal?
Will the clerk please read the title of the next resolution and call up the people that will testify?
Resolution 190089, a resolution authorizing hearings to be held on potential for abuse in the guardianship appointment process and the financial burdens that such abuse could have on individuals being placed into guardianship. The first panel is Samuel Brooks and Diane Menino.
And Councilman Jones has an opening statement before the panel testifies.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. As we are, they once were. As they are, we will be. And this is related to our senior population that we talked about in how they live, what kind of structures they will live in. This is more germane to who is authorized to look after their financial affairs, to make determinations about where and how they will live, make guardianship decisions that affect their lives, and sometimes in spite of their best wishes or well wishes. And so we want to take a look at this hearing today for the potential of abuse of guardianships and the appointment process, specifically financial abuse that can happen in that process. The legal definition of a guardian is any qualified individual who is appointed by the court to represent an incapacitated person. An incapacitated person is an adult that the court finds to be unable to manage their financial resources or provide for their own physical health and safety. Guardians are supposed to protect, I'm going to say that again, guardians are supposed to protect incapacitated people and serve in their best interests. There are times when the appointed guardian is trusted by family members or friends, but oftentimes these individuals are lawyers who are awarded fees that are in order to take care of incapacitated people, and these incapacitated people must pay. These guardians can make decisions regarding the incapacitated person's financial or receiving federal benefits or on behalf of the individual. While many guardians serve the best interests of the incapacitated person, they are appointed to protect, often, sometimes, every now and then, people take advantages of vulnerable individuals. According to a report done by the Social Security Administration in 2014, approximately 60% of the courts do not review the credit history of potential guardians And about 40% do not conduct criminal background checks for potential guardians. In my office, we have received several complaints from seniors across the years who believe that the guardians that were supposed to appoint were stealing from them, or believe that they were deemed incapacitated when they were not incapacitated. Given these statistics and my knowledge of these complaints, it is important that we had this hearing today. The purpose of this hearing is to bring the issue to the public's attention and ensure that systems designed to protect our seniors from abuse and neglect function properly, and that guardianships process in Philadelphia is adequately overseen so that we can correct any defalcations that may come about. In China, children who grow up to be adults are mandated to pay for their parents' care. That is a fact. It's in reverse here. In Italy, because of how seniors are treated by society, they tend to live longer. They can't figure it out. They check the water, they check the food, they even check the weather to see if it mattered. No, it's because they're held in high regard by society. In America and in Philadelphia, all we want to do, we don't need to make them live longer than God says. We don't want them to necessarily have their children pay for them, but we will protect them from abuse. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Jones, thank you for your leadership on this issue and also your opening statement. Will the first witness please identify themselves for the record?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chairman Taubenberger, and thank you, Councilman Jones and the rest of the committee. My name is Samuel Brooks, and I'm an attorney in the Aging and Disabilities Unit of Community Legal Services, also known as CLS, and I'm grateful to be here today, and I'm grateful that you're bringing this important issue to light. There's a guardianship crisis in Philadelphia. Although guardianship can be a very helpful tool when a loved one cannot act independently, we are seeing many cases where seniors and people with disabilities are unnecessarily losing the ability to make decisions for themselves and remain independent at home. Every year, some of Philadelphia's most vulnerable citizens go through a judicial guardianship process that often results in the loss of their basic civil rights and can lead to unnecessary institutionalization in nursing homes. CLS has represented Philadelphians in every stage of the guardianship process, from representing individuals through the initial judicial process to helping individuals have a guardian removed, and we have witnessed firsthand the problems that pervade the guardianship process. Recent reporting by the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Reading Eagle revealed that for months in the Philadelphia courts had been appointing a professional guardian with a criminal history of financial fraud. Judicial scrutiny revealed that for some of the individuals for which she was guardian, money was unaccounted for. In another instance, CLS discovered that a guardian, who was guardian for dozens of people in Philadelphia and the surrounding counties, had permanently moved to South Carolina without informing the court, and essentially abandoning dozens of vulnerable senior citizens who were in need of significant support. These stories of exploitative or negligent guardians bring needed attention to the guardianship process. However, bad guardians are just a part of a system that is in need of significant reforms. The stakes in the guardianship process are extremely high. A person can lose every one of their civil liberties and have their rights, such as where they want to live and how to manage their own finances, given to a stranger. A person can be unnecessarily forced to move into a nursing home and then have their home sold and their money squandered on care they do not need. Unfortunately, Pennsylvania is in the minority of states that does not appoint counsel for all individuals subject to a guardianship petition. Pennsylvania should join the majority of states that recognize that the guardianship process is a complex judicial process in which an individual's basic rights hang in the balance, and require that counsel be appointed for all individuals subject to a guardianship petition. Further, this appointed counsel must be required to zealously advocate on behalf of their client. Additionally, in Philadelphia, the courts must take better steps to ensure that the person subject to a guardianship petition is actually present at the hearing. Unfortunately, it is not uncommon in Philadelphia for an individual to have a guardian appointed without the person being represented by counsel or even being present at that hearing. CLS has represented individuals who had guardians appointed without them even being aware of it. Pennsylvania law requires that guardianship be pursued only after less restrictive means have failed. Where a guardian is needed, priority should be given to allowing family members to serve as guardian, rather than individuals acting as professional guardians. Typically, family members are more knowledgeable about an individual's needs. Courts should recognize this fact and give preference to family members. Along with preference for family members, training and support should be offered to family members acting as guardians. Once someone has become a guardian, they have specific legal duties with which they must comply. These rules are complicated and can lead to confusion for lay guardians. There must be supports in place to help ensure that family members are aware of their duties and able to comply with them. Unfortunately, there will be instances where there is no family member to act as guardian for an individual, and a professional guardian will need to be appointed. Currently, there are a few professional or training requirements for someone who wants to serve as a professional guardian. As mentioned before, a simple Google search revealed that one professional guardian had a sordid criminal history involving financial fraud, yet she was appointed dozens of times to oversee the finances of some of Philadelphia's most vulnerable residents. Criminal background checks should be required for all professional guardians. Additionally, there should be a certification process that ensures professional guardians are properly trained and meet adequate practice standards. Currently, the system incentivizes the institutionalization of individuals with professional guardians. Current Medicaid rules provide that guardians can only be paid for their services if the person under guardianship is in a nursing home, but not if they are receiving care in the community. This creates an incentive to place the person under guardianship in a nursing home, and then often results in the liquidation of an individual's estate, including their homes. These monetary incentives to institutionalize individuals must be removed. They are ripe with potential for abuse. Guardians also must be properly monitored. Guardians are required to file reports each year with the court detailing the care provided for the individual under guardianship and how their funds were handled. However, courts throughout the Commonwealth lack the staff to review these reports. Some of these reports reveal the expenditure of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars by guardians without explanation. If the annual reports are reviewed, however, these situations are not detected and no action is taken. To the Philadelphia Orphans Court credit, it has taken some steps to increase protections for these individuals subject to guardianship. There is a new statewide guardian tracking system in place that promises to better monitor guardians by electronically notifying the courts when reports contain information which needs further investigation. Additionally, the court has dedicated a staff member to monitor these reports and to take action when a report indicates there may be a potential problem. We hope and believe that the Philadelphia Orphans Court will continue to institute reforms that ensure better protection for individuals subject to guardianship. Lastly, and we believe foremost, guardianship should only be pursued when all other options have been proven to be ineffective. Instead of a guardian would increase social or health supports, allow a person to maintain their rights and autonomy in the community. Do families need additional support to help a loved one maintain their home so that they can avoid being placed in a nursing home? Only when all else fails should guardianship be allowed. Fortunately, some of these issues are being addressed on the state level, and here today with potential legislation. State Senator Art Haywood plans on reintroducing a guardianship bill that will require counsel for all individuals subject to a guardianship petition, as well as criminal background checks and certification of professional guardians. However, Philadelphia courts can take immediate action by appointing counsel for all individuals subject to a guardianship petition, ensuring individuals are present at guardianship hearings, appointing family members when possible if guardians are necessary, and increasing scrutiny on all guardians. Most importantly, we must all work together to discover alternatives to guardianship that can preserve the dignity and the rights of our fellow Philadelphians and ensure justice is present for all. Thank you for letting me come today.
Councilman Jones?
No, I should let you testify. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I retract my request.
All right.
Okay,
So noted.
Thank you I'm Diane Menio, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Advocacy for the Rights and Interests of the Elderly. We like to make it easier for you, and we call ourselves CARI. Thank you for inviting us here today. This is an issue that we are very, very concerned about, and we hear about every day. I just want to first say that a lot of my remarks are echoed in Sam's remarks. I'll just kind of cut to the chase here rather than give you the whole testimony. But one of the things that I wanted to mention, in Philadelphia, when you were talking about the issue of guardianship and how it affects older Philadelphians, Philadelphia has a very poor 24.5% of the elders in Philadelphia live under 125% of the federal poverty level, and 17.4%, that's a pretty big number, live actually below the poverty level, which we all know the federal poverty level is pretty darn low. So some of these things, when we're talking about guardianship, we have to think about who ends up in guardianship as well. And many times we find people who are really neglected throughout the process, the system. And so we need to find more ways to help people who are in need every day. So that's just, and I want to talk a little bit about what we hear in our office. We basically are in our office, we've been around since 1977. We do advocacy at several different levels. We do public policy advocacy, we do education and training, but we also talk to individuals, and they're the ones who teach us about the problems. So our core program, the CARI Line, is a free, comprehensive source of information, guidance, and referral and advocacy for older adults and their caregivers. We'll really talk to anybody who calls us. And we want to help them navigate this really complex system of aging. We take all the calls that come to us. Over the past 10 years or so, calls about guardianship have been increasing. Prior to that, we usually got calls about guardianship from a family member who was concerned and wanted to file a petition for guardianship. It's very difficult for people to get help with that. It costs money to file a petition. It's also, the guardianship tracking system is great, but it also creates another requirement for family guardians who may not be able to do the reporting in the same way. They need help with that. They definitely need to report, and I don't want to argue against that. And so we hear from families who are prevented from visiting their loved one by a professional guardian. They have no part in the decision making and are often not privy to financial statements. So once a professional guardian is named, this could be an attorney or somebody who is a guardian, and professional is a loose term for guardian, once that person is named, they have full control over the person. The court has some discretion to be able to limit certain duties of that person or give them extra duties, but generally they're able to make those decisions. So what we hear from people is family members calling us and saying, my mother had a guardian named and she's in a nursing home now, and we wanted to take care of her at home. Now, what the family dynamic was before that, we don't always know. But what we do know is that even in some cases where there may have been abuse or neglect, family members still care. Mom wants to see her daughter or her son. And if they're in a nursing home, they're protected. So even if there had been abuse before, that family has a right to visit, and mom has a right to have them visit. And so the idea that they can be, prevented from visiting is a serious problem. And the other thing, and you've mentioned this, is that no one's overseeing the guardian as after they've been named. The other thing I wanted to say is that when you were talking about in your opening statement about people with incapacity needing guardianship, and I want to just make the distinction here, is that yes, a person needs to be incapacitated in order to have a guardian named, but they also have to be in need of a guardian, which are two different things. It's and, not or. And so issue, some people who get into the system already have a support system around them. Someone may have be agent under the power of attorney. There are many different issues involved here. One of the things that often triggers the appointment of a professional guardian or an attorney is infighting within the family. So one daughter is the agent, another daughter or son doesn't like what she's doing and goes to court. And oftentimes, even though one of those family members may be fine to be named as the guardian, it ends up being because they're fighting. We support the different interventions, like mediation, for instance. There is very good mediation in this city. We have an organization that does elder mediation. And so we need to do more. And as Sam said, we need to have more alternatives. Let's try to protect people without having them lose all their rights. Another frequent call we get is from that incapacitated person themselves. Sometimes they don't understand what happened to them or even why they went to court. One time I had a gentleman call me, and I asked him, and he called me because he was upset because he went into his bank and he didn't have access to his money. And the other thing he told me is that he was upset because his guardian didn't pay his electric bill, and he always paid his bills on time. So and by the way, he also emailed me all of his statements so that I could see what was happening. And so I said to him, well, did you understand why you were in court? And he said, because my son was mad at me. And he had an argument with his son. This all happened. It was a long story, but nevertheless, no one really gave him the information he needed to process that this is what was going to happen to him. And it's a long story, but it's not a happy ending in this story. Other times they tell us that the guardian doesn't visit them, doesn't give them spending money on a regular schedule. And some callers make us wonder why they have a guardian at all, like the gentleman I just mentioned. Sadly, many elders who have been placed under guardianship not only weren't represented by counsel, but they did not even have the benefit of attending the hearing. And when we've looked at transcripts, or talked to them, they weren't even questioned. In fact, the guy I just told you about, I asked him, I said, well, did the judge ask you questions? And the answer he gave me was, he said, well, I won't tell you because now this will name the judge and I don't want to do that. The judge had heard made a decision on a very public case. And so he started asking him about that. And then he started talking because they both played bridge and they started talking in detail about bridge. But no questions about, for him to answer in terms of his own capacity. In 2013, the Pennsylvania Department of Aging funded us to do a study on guardianship. And so we did a study throughout Pennsylvania to see what was happening here, because in large part, we really don't know what's happening. This new tracking system will at least give us some data, but until now, we really haven't even had that. And so we looked at best practices all over the country. One of the things we learned was that incapacitated person was present at the hearing only 31% of the time. That doesn't make sense to me at all. And they don't have legal representation 25% of the time. And the lawyers, we talked to lawyers, 42% of them said that they were not asked by the court to demonstrate that they had explored alternatives to guardianship. And that's in the statutes. They're supposed to make that plea. Having counsel appointed in each case is important, but it's also important to remember what the role of counsel is. We strongly believe that counsel in all cases should zealously advocate for the expressed wishes of the alleged incapacitated person. With effective counsel, we may be able to prevent guardianships where alternatives are available, where the individual, although incapacitated, doesn't need a guardian, or help to make sure that that there is a limited guardianship is used if it's called for. So we really need to make sure we're doing the right thing by people. And so I'm going to skip over this. And some of my recommendations are the same as Sam's. I've been involved with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court working on these issues for the past, I guess it's been about 5 or 6 years now, and we've made some changes. There's a new rule, Orphans Court rule coming out in June 1st of this year that will require background checks. It won't go as far as the legislation, and that's why we need Senator Haywood's legislation. So we do support that, but the other piece of the other side of that is I want to make sure that background checking is not so broad that it impacts the ability of family members who may have something in their background that, some criminal background, but at this point can take care of mom. And so we don't want to take family members out of the equation because they may have some kind of criminal background. We believe very strongly that there should be judicial discretion when that decision is made, when they see what the background is. We think that, okay, I'm going to finish now, but one of the last things I wanted to say is I left you a document. I believe you have my testimony, and I left a separate document. And this document is a project that we developed, and we've been trying to get it funded for a number of years. It's been challenging, but it's modeled after the court-appointed special advocates program for children. We believe that if an advocate is appointed at the time the petition is filed, we can make sure that the family members that need to be notified have been notified. By the way, in Pennsylvania, our statute only requires really for people in Pennsylvania to be notified. So yes, they may notify people out of state, but we've also gotten calls from people out of state who've had a loved one here who was placed in guardianship, and they had no idea. We think that an advocate could be quite helpful throughout the process, even after, if there is a guardian named, after that guardian is named, to make sure that the abuse is not happening, to make sure they're doing their job. So thank you, and we hope you'll support all these reforms and do whatever you can to help improve this system.
Councilman Jones?
I'm sad for our seniors. I know of, in public policy, you may think there's a big book that comes and lands on our desks so that we go and explore issues like this. It is not true. It usually happens through individual constituent service complaints and or requests. We were literally walking around the hallway because the Orphans Court is around the corner, and two people who lived in our district came around the corner in tears, crying and talking about their aunt that was getting ready to be removed from the house because it was deemed that the kids and their generational tangled titles involved were no longer capable of taking care of auntie. And they're like bewildered because they've been taking care of auntie for over a decade. So much so that they were going to remove her from the house, put her in one of my senior assisted living facilities, which, dare I say, is pretty pricey. And then they would take the equity out of the house that the whole family lived in until such time as it was exhausted, and then, and there was a fund that was established at that senior facility for people who were hardship cases. But everybody in that house was going to be homeless because they were going to sell that property in order to take care of auntie. No one knows whether auntie wanted to leave or not, but that was the ruling of the court, which caught my attention. After that, maybe a couple years later, there was a well-known radio personality who had amassed a considerable amount of money during their years, kept it, under the pillow, I guess. And their grandson was appointed the guardian. They did not know there was financial problems until she received an eviction notice of her condo. and an eviction from her storage facility, because these were bills that were not being paid. So that was the tip of the iceberg to know that these problems existed in a big way. And I'm very concerned. So real recap, there is no standard by which you have to go through a license or review to be a guardian, including criminal background and including abuse checks and financial convictions or anything like that.
Well, in Pennsylvania, there is no certification for guardianships. I'll say that first of all. Secondly, there is a certification agency, and some people voluntarily get certified. Now, the legislation that's been introduced would require certification, and our advisory council for elder justice in the courts is working on this issue as well. And we strongly suggest, and some judges have local rules where they require that. As to the second part of your question was about, I'm sorry.
Background checks?
Background checks. And so the background checks, again, can happen voluntarily, and it would be a nice thing if they had a background check, even though it's not required. But as I said, they will be required June 1st by the courts of Pennsylvania. There will be a requirement. What is not required is any kind of, there's no list of offenses that would preclude them from being guardian. The legislation that's been introduced would come closer to giving some guidelines.
So you mentioned one guardian that had 12 cases of mismanagement. Was it you?
No, that was over 100 cases.
Yeah,
Say that
that
again.
was the Gloria Byers case. She had been, there had been some missing funds, and finally it came to a head when an attorney discovered this and brought it to the attention of the court. To the court's credit, to the Philadelphia Orphans Court credit, they immediately removed her from all her cases. And just to speak to the background check, to the court's credit as well, it is itself instituted a background check requirement now. A criminal history check in response to what happened with the Byers case. And they have unilaterally done that, and require new guardians to have that background check. The current legislation would likely will only apply to professional guardians, so as not to prevent family members who are preferable, in our opinion, and I think to most people, to prevent them from serving.
So I'm gonna keep an eye on my kids now. I mean, because it can happen like that way. And
What she would do, and sorry to interrupt you, but what they would do is they would get appointed a guardian to a senior, and they would put them in a nursing home, and then they would petition the court to sell their home. And then they would clean out the home, and they would hire someone to clean it out. And in her case, that person was, the company that cleaned it out was owned by her husband. And they cleaned out her home, and then they would petition to get $10,000 to $15,000 from the proceeds of the sale for the services they provide. So there's really some distorted incentives there to put individuals in nursing homes. And oftentimes these folks don't need guardians. They do have capacity, and they've just been stuck into a system that doesn't account for that.
What concerns me is how can they not know that someone requested a guardianship? I mean, we could be sitting here and somebody could be around the corner filling out the papers.
Yeah, it's one of the, I mean, they must be served with the petition. How it's served is sometimes, one of the things I've heard, sometimes the petitioner has an attorney and the petitioner's attorney serves. It's, questionable in some cases whether or not that attorney explained things to them properly, including their right to counsel. And because the way the statute reads it currently, if they do have access to counsel, but they have to request counsel. So we're talking about people who are presumed to be incapacitated. And so that's part of the reason that we're advocating for everyone to have counsel. And so, but it is, and so sometimes I think that's what happens is whoever's presenting it, sometimes it's a process server, somebody who wouldn't be able to explain it very well. And that's part of the reason that I'd like to have our advocate program, because then we could explain to people what's happening to them and hear their side. And in that case you were talking about, is a perfect case for the family, where the family lived in the home and cared for mom or aunt or whatever it was. But in that kind of situation, a mediator may be able to work some of that out. Maybe somebody in that home was abusing her and shouldn't be in the home. Maybe no one was abusing her, but there were some miscommunications. Whatever it was, you need to figure those things out. And we don't do enough work before we go to orphanage court.
So I'm watching often in first of the month or whenever those checks come in, family members that just, and I don't mean to typecast anybody, but just don't seem like the caring type. Walking grandmom into the bank, you know, handling her financial transactions, and I just worry that there's no standard to guard her. And, you know, her eyesight is failing, and instead of that $100, there might be $1,000 being taken out. And there has to be a better way to guard people who are, you know, and let me ask you this question. When you say guardian in the senior sense, is it the same as guardian for our youth?
It's the same process, yes.
So there
The
might be...
difference is that young people are generally, by definition, incapacitated. You know, they do not have the capacity to make their own decisions because of their age. Older people have capacity until it's proven that they don't.
So if I'm a 10-year-old, my parents were in a car accident, the insurance settled, and it's in there, and then there's a guardian guarding those funds, and then I turn 18, and I don't have it. What happens then?
When they're 18?
Yeah, or when someone finds out, is there any remedy for that 10-year-old that's now 18, is on a college campus and wants to get his tuition paid, and there's nothing? How do
Oh,
we...
you mean if somebody took that
Correct.
trust? I mean, hopefully it would be set up in a trust that would not be able to be abused, but it is, that situation is challenging, and somebody should be overseeing.
But some of them are worded for educational purposes. And I can interpret that to mean he needs back-to-school clothing, da-da-da-da, and each one of those, the meter is ticking each time. And, you know, is there a fee structure that is, so I can say...
No, the judge determines what's permissible. And so, no, there's not a particular, I mean, one of the things I mentioned is that we do have a lot of low-income people, and that, you know, in all ages. And in many cases, the guardian gets paid a little or nothing to be a guardian.
So I'm going to tread on thin ice here and ask, conceivably, hypothetically, I know no person like this, if Judge Taubenberger now, right?
An elevation.
You know, I worked very hard to get him in office. I did fundraisers for him because he's prohibited from raising his own funds, and I'm a lawyer, and then all of a sudden, he's in an orphan court, and who's his favorite appointee to guardianship? That could be me, right? And so...
Well, if it were this gentleman who is incapacitated, not Councilman, not Councilmember Al Taubenberger, but if that gentleman were believed to be incapacitated,
so I'm representing...
He wouldn't decide who his guardian is unless he decided that in legal documents before he became incapacitated.
So my rich colleague, Councilman Dom, I'm getting ready to be his guardian. I'm going to go around all the way now, because he looked a little loopy when he was in here. So how do we...
Well, we try to educate people to have a trusted person, to name an agent under a power of attorney who is trusted. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of people name their oldest child. They may or not be the best person to do it. And so we we encourage people to have someone that they can trust. Also, there's, we encourage people not to put somebody's name on their bank accounts, for
So
instance.
somebody brought this to our attention. We're in here that Don was having problems, and he appoints me to oversee his large estate because he knows me.
Oh, you're saying he's doing a power of attorney that would name you as agent?
Yes.
Okay.
So who monitors that?
No one. Is that right, Sam?
I'm confused. So he's appointed you as power of attorney. Is he incapacitated, or does he have?
Don fell down and bumped his head,
Yeah.
and I drove him around in Uber for a while,
Right.
and he told me he needed me.
Right. And the question is,
My question is, who monitors what I do?
Well,
If
right.
me and him, we are friends.
well, the law requires that annually you file a report that is twofold. Report about the person, which is how he's doing, where he's living, what his diagnoses are, what his prognosis is, and whether you believe that a guardianship should still continue. In addition to that, there's a report about the estate. Historically, especially in Philadelphia, this was something that you just filed. You put how much money you spent from the principal of that estate, what you spent it on, and you submitted it. But it was well known that those were never reviewed, that the courts just took them, they were docketed, and no one was reviewing them. To their credit, and I'm not sure that this was out of spite or negligence or just they didn't have the resources to do it, because they've certainly instituted some reforms now and are much more, they're looking at these much more strictly. And we applaud them for that. But so if you started expending now all his money and you didn't have a reasonable explanation for what that money was, you would be called in and there would be an accounting made, and you could be removed, and there could be further repercussions for you. You could
Is
be
it
financially
criminal?
liable, and arguably you could be criminally.
So how many cases has the Philadelphia District Attorney filed on guardianship malfeasance?
Oh, you're going to have to ask, don't we have someone from the district attorney's office
Is there
coming in?
someone here?
I think they weren't able to come.
They were on the list that I had.
So for sure they're going to get this
I
question.
don't think there's a lot, but I can't
So we're
answer
going
that
to
question.
give them this question during the budget process, because as we grow older and grayer, these protections need to be there, that if this lady, for example, had hundreds of cases, where is she now?
That's a good question. To our knowledge, she has not suffered any criminal repercussions. I know that, there probably would need to be a forensic accountant that would have to go through all the documents. And it wasn't just in Philadelphia as well, it was in the surrounding counties. I'm not sure where she is now. And to be clear, we don't oppose people with criminal records acting as guardians, but she, where there was smoke, there was fire with her, and that was discovered, and anecdotally as well from other guardians, how she behaved. So we don't know, and we don't know where she is, and
So
what's going on.
How much money are we talking about possibly being?
In that case, I think it was tens of thousands.
It was people, a lot of the people that she was guardian for were the people that I talked about, the low-income people. They may have owned a property, but they generally qualified for Medicaid when they went into the nursing home, in part because they spent down that estate. But it's hard to know without, as Sam said, you really need a forensic accountant to dig into all of that information.
Last question, Mr. Chairman, for me. The Supreme Court ruled that, June 1,
Yes,
that all guardianship rules are gone, and that certain
the
forms...
local rules are gone,
So
yes.
can you elaborate on that for a minute?
Do you want to do it, or should I?
Go ahead.
He's a lawyer. Well, it does supersede the local rules. So if there is something Philadelphia needs to do that's not in the current rules, or if it's court rules, they can do it, but they have to get approval by, and some of them actually have already gotten approval to have their own local rules. So they have to get approval from the Supreme Court, to my knowledge.
That's correct, but I think this is a good thing. I think the rules that are coming now are more robust and will do better to protect seniors and people with disabilities. So it's a good thing, and I think there's still room for innovation locally. I mean, Philadelphia is always going to have the most guardianships because we're an aging population, and we have a lot of people here. And Philadelphia really needs to.
So it's governed by the state rules, correct? Yes. What can we do locally to help?
Well, can I want to make, just throw in something else here. And that is that a large number of the people, older people who end up in Orphans Court with a guardianship petition come through the Older Adult Protective Services Department, which is at Philadelphia Corporation for Aging. The Inspector General in Pennsylvania audited protective services across Pennsylvania probably about a year ago. They released an executive summary. We can't get the full report, which may have more specific county information, but it was a damning report. And I don't think we have any reason to believe Philadelphia is any better than any other county when in this audit. And so we really need to look at a lot more.
Why can't you get the full report?
Pardon?
Why can't you get the full report?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not, I mean, it should be accessible through right to know, but they're refusing.
And one thing I think what Diane's putting, the main driver of guardianships in Philadelphia are not individuals. It's been older adult protective services and nursing homes. It's the most common instance of where someone isn't present at a hearing is when it's a nursing home. There's a nursing home attorney who'll bring in 4 or 5 batch of petitions, and all that attorney has to say is, Your Honor, they can't make decisions for themselves. They can't come here because they're in a nursing home. And that's very common, unfortunately. And we have represented those individuals when they want to go home, they don't have a home, or they want to go somewhere else, they can't because they have a guardian that they don't know. So I think those are the 2 prime movers are older adult protective services and nursing homes. And certainly there's families, but families resolve these issues oftentimes. It's where there isn't a family, and sometimes it's more complicated, where those guardianships are coming
What can
from.
we do locally?
Locally, I think we need to support the courts. The courts need resources to make sure that other alternatives to guardianship are explored. Oftentimes, why someone is in the guardianship process is that person was in crisis. They needed more supports. They fell and they were isolated at home. And older adult protective services comes in and they take a sword and just take extreme action when really what that person needs is additional support. So I think guidance, and just this hearing today is going to help to bring attention to this matter because it's flown under the radar. So we need alternatives to guardianship, more support for seniors who are in crisis, and in addition, supporting the court in their efforts to do background checks and monitor guardians more appropriately.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
You're welcome. That kind of surmises what we're doing here, because most of the rules and regulations that you have talked about are part of the state system, and we have very little, if no, jurisdiction on it. You did say we could petition the Supreme Court to get greater.
Yeah, there's certainly, I mean, the rules that govern are state law, and then there's the state code, and then underneath that, there are the local rules that have been developed not uniformly across the Commonwealth. And certainly, Philadelphia can create its own rules that might be more innovative, but they would need approval from the state Supreme Court. And I don't think that's a Herculean task to get that approval. And I think the Supreme Court would understand the uniqueness of Philadelphia.
Well, if we were to come up with some rules and regulations that we see fit after reviewing the testimony of today, what would be our step? To pass something as a city ordinance and then have the state Supreme Court weigh in on it?
I believe that the local Orphans Court has to adopt local rules. What the process in the city is, I'm not sure. Do you know, Sam?
I'm not sure that,
Because even, just point of order, as far as I understand, the Orphans Court is still under the jurisdiction of the state.
right.
Yes.
I don't think there's anything that prevents the council from creating additional requirements, say, for professional guardians. I think that the only thing you couldn't do is make them less restrictive.
But if you have a power of attorney to someone, that kind of negates all this. I mean,
Not necessarily.
oh, of course, it might.
Well,
really?
there, as I mentioned before, there may be someone who is accusing that person who is the agent of abusing the power, if the person they have the power for is incapacitated.
Two things. You had mentioned earlier on, I wanted to ask you, is this the proposal that you put in front of us? Okay, so I would like to read it. And I guess the other thing, you said there's an agency that won't allow us to look at their report.
Oh, that's the Inspector General in Pennsylvania.
The Inspector General of the state of Pennsylvania will not allow anyone to look at that report.
As far as I know, I think the only group that's seen it, I think, is the Pennsylvania Department of Aging. The local area agencies on aging haven't seen it. The press can't get a hold of it. We can't get a hold of it.
Well, maybe you'll help us draft a letter.
We can send you, I'd be glad to send the executive summary over to you.
But we cannot see the full report. We can see the executive.
Well, you can
Well,
request
maybe
it
with
as
your-
we
with-
all have.
With your help and support, I, as the chair of the Aging Committee, Al Taubenberger, and my committee here, will ask for that report and see what they tell us.
Sure. I think, that's what I said, everybody should ask for it.
We'd be happy to help you draft a letter.
I would very much.
I think it's very important,
like it.
and it's absurd that we can't see that.
Right. And it is an
Yes,
area.
I would agree.
And I have to get back to, and I don't want to make excuses for any of this, but there is a cost to a lot of the things that we talk about, and we can't ignore that. Now, I do also believe that
To implement it, there is a
cost of
cost.
bringing a guardian, bringing a petition to court, having attorneys all around, doing evaluations, all of those things cost money.
Sure.
So could we redirect those resources into alternatives, for instance?
Okay.
I think we can.
Well, yeah, I'd like to certainly explore that, and I think that's my responsibility as chair of the Aging Committee.
Great.
I'm finished with my questions. I can't thank you enough. And will the clerk please call the next and final panel? Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very
both.
much. We
And
appreciate you
do not
looking at this
leave.
issue.
We'll exchange information so we can get that letter drafted.
The second panel is Nancy Thompson and Jackie Clay.
Whenever you are set, please state your name for the record.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Thompson, and I am here today to testify my personal experience dealing with guardianship and that the orphan court is when it comes to appointing a guardian and having oversight on the action of these guardians. I didn't hear. Want me to repeat it?
Take your time.
Okay. First off, in 2005, I would like to say my mother's rights were violated, which I heard by PCA. And they were violated when I had a waiver on file where she was staying at the Sydney Hill Apartments. Sydney Hill Apartments Independent Living Facility. They were supposed to have contacted a family member when they came in to make her sign documentation, and they were claiming that she didn't know what she was doing or saying. We didn't receive any phone calls. with the waiver on file, and they took action in their own hands and took her benefit, made her sign documents. We don't know what was signed. The next thing I know, they were the payee of my mother. In 2005, again, we had, when I moved my mom into the Sydney Hill apartment, I requested me and my mother to fill out documents for me to become her power of attorney, which the Miss Robertson, which was the super social worker there, snatched the documents out of my hands once she gave them to me, claiming that she can't allow me to fill out the documents. And I asked her why, and she said, you would have to contact PCA, which was Sanford Crawford at the time. I didn't understand that, because my mother was not originally under anybody. I was caring for her the whole time. And 2005 again to 2006, Mom received an eviction notice to vacate her apartment on 4/15/06. PCA was receiving Mom's benefit and hadn't paid the rent there for 6 months.
When you, just point of information, when you say PCA, that's Philadelphia Corporation of the Aging?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
In 2006, I had to financially support my mother with clothing, clothes, personal items, and food, because she wasn't receiving any of her benefits for her to buy anything off of her income. Since then, Howard, in 2007, Howard Solomon had became the guardian for my mother from court.
Who is he?
Howard Solomon is the guardian, and he was appointed by that court.
Any kind of relation, or they just picked his name out of a hat kind of a thing? Or?
Well, I was there, and they told me when we went to court, when PCA set this court thing up, that they was gonna appoint a guardian for my mother, which I didn't understand why, while I'm there taking care of her. So they said that they were supposed to ask me if I wanted to be the guardian, since I'm taking care of her. And that didn't take place. They did nothing take place. They had me come into court just for them to appoint Howard, to appoint Howard Solomon as guardian. I don't even know who he was or anything. Like you just said, they picked him out of a hat.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it went from there, and I was not satisfied and sent a letter complaining that I was not satisfied with the guardian being appointed, and why wasn't I appointed? And they tell you to submit that information within a 20-day period, which I did, and I didn't get no response. When Howard became the payee, my mother didn't receive any income for about 3 months. So that led me on to continue on taking care of her financially. And then when Howard Solomon started sending funds out for her, he was only sending $100 a month. So, and that's where I had to still continue on taking care of her off of my benefit, because they were not sending her enough money for her to live off of. Now, remind you that she was receiving about $700 a month, but she was only receiving $100 a month. In 2007, I moved my mother out of the Sydney Hill apartment in September of 2007. Howard claimed that he would start sending her $400 a month when she moved in with me. So when she moved in with me in September, he didn't start paying the $400 until November. of '07. And in 2008, Mom been accused of owing $13,000 from an overpayment from SSI. My question was, why would she be accused of owing $13,000 when she hasn't been receiving her income for since 2005? But they are claiming she owes the $13,000. I contacted Social Security. I even had them to review, investigate, and everything, and they're still saying that she owes the $13,000. When Deborah Spire and Howard Solomon were the ones receiving her benefits from '05. And they said this took place in '08 up to 2010. They are accusing her to pay the $13,000 back. And in 2009, Deborah Spire became guardianship of Mom's benefit. When she became the guardianship of my mother, she since then received my mother's benefits. She had cut the payment that Howard Solomon had paid $400. She had cut it down to $200 a month. So that leaves me, like I had a child, I had to keep taking care of her. So from then on, in 2010, Mom came home from that nursing home with a bed sore. I had to continue taking care of her, treating her with a bed sore. So that's a monitor continuing care that I had to take care of her with, which the bed sore actually closed up, but it took about, after she came home, took about 6 months to heal. While I was doing that, I wasn't receiving enough money to pay for the dressings and bandage and the medical supplies that I needed to treat the sore. So I tried to ask the nurse. There was a nurse that come out every week to check on the bed sore to make sure it was healing correctly. And I was complaining to her that I'm not getting enough money to pay for these things, and was there anything that she could do? And she said, well, only thing she was able to bring was not even enough to last for no more than 2 or 3 days of the dressings and bandage and stuff that I needed to patch my mother with. She wasn't able to do anything. Even though I had contacted Deborah Spire and let her know that I need more money, these dressings wound up costing me $25 to $30 a week, besides all the other things I had to pay. In 2011, Mom's other furniture was thrown out from bed bugs. I contacted Deborah Spire and asked, could I use some of her money that she had in the bank? Mom had about $8,000 or $9,000 in the bank that she hadn't used. And could she use some of that to purchase some of the furniture she needed for her room? And Deborah Spire never got back in touch with me with that. So we never got any furniture from that point. So in 2011, again, the Norristown office scheduled an appointment for me and Mom to come into the office. They wanted us to come into the office so that they
Excuse me, if I could. The Norristown office?
Yes.
Of who?
The Social Security office, Norristown.
Oh, okay, understood. Thank you.
They had us come into the office to so that they can find out why my mother has 4 to 5 banks, which I was not aware of. So she went over the banks, she showed me the banks, and she was like, are you familiar with any of these banks? And I said, no, because I've never seen them. And 2, Deborah Spire doesn't disclose any information to me about my mother's financial. Even when I ask her about it, she doesn't disclose anything to me. So that's when the lady asked my mother, would she like to change the guardianship from Deborah Spire to me? And my mother said yes, and that's when she changed it back in 2000, at the end of the year, 2011, and I became a payee in 2012, the first month, January. I became the the payee for about 1 month. That's crazy. In 1 month, I became the payee it seemed that Deborah Spire must have been complaining about it and lied and said something to the Social Security Board, making them change the payee back over to her from me. And that's when Social Security had decided in 2012, March was January, in February or March, that they suspended my mother's benefits from going to anyone. So they suspended the benefit in 2000. She didn't have any income from February or March to December of that year. And my income, when I was working, I was receiving unemployment, and my unemployment exhausted in January of 2012. So we both were in zero income. From that point, in 2012, the rent, my mom's income, that went into effect. Okay, in 2012, I got an eviction notice for the first time, and living in the Penwyn house for about 21 years, I lived there. And I received an eviction notice after living there for 21 years because Deborah Spire refused to pay my mother's portion of the rent. And there was money in the bank, but she refused to use it. So I had received an eviction notice. But at that time, let me see.
Mom is with you at that time.
Huh?
Your mother is with you.
Yes, and she's been with me all this time. I'm trying to read this.
Take your time.
My nerves is shocked.
There's nothing to be nervous about. You have a very understanding panel here, and just take your time to collect your thoughts.
In 2012, we had to borrow money from friends for food and personal items. I think in that year, 2012, I think that's when everybody's food stamps got cut off, cash got cut off. We didn't have no income, so we couldn't even rely on any food stamps, so we had to borrow money to get by for personal needs and food in 2012. I even not borrowed money, but in order to keep my car running, I had a friend that would fix my car, and he trusted me to pay him, so he kept my car fixed, and I would pay him whenever I came across some more money. So back in 2012 again, okay, in 2013, I couldn't hold a job down because I was suffering from depression and diabetes to where I broke out. Oh, God. Yeah, depression and diabetes to where my stress level had went below, and I couldn't handle doing anything. I think I had to go to the hospital or something because, you know, when you under so much stress and depression and stuff, that because there's so much stuff happening, you just can't handle it. In 2014, Deborah received cash money, a case money of $4,700 of my mother when she was in a paratransit accident. My mother was in a paratransit accident, and the case is settled, and they sent the money to her. Mom never received not one penny of it. And in 2014, again, we moved to New Jersey October the 1st because I couldn't handle what was going on over here. Maybe I said we could find some other solutions. Oh, okay. Oh, thanks. So that was that case. In 2014, we did that. Okay, in 2015, Deborah received $149 $240,000 of mom case money.
Excuse me, repeat that figure?
I'm not even sure if that is, she received at least $243,000 in case money. I had to petition the court to get paid an additional monies for mom because she was still receiving only $200 a month. In 2016, the rent increased at the apartment in New Jersey because I had started working with her income. So they said that we have to pay, we was on Section 8, so whatever income I get, they base it on that. So in 2016, my rent had increased up to $415. I wrote a letter to Deborah Spry letting her know that mom has additional $200 to pay towards the rent. Can she start paying that towards her rent? And she refused to pay the additional money in 2016. The only thing she was sending was that $200. So I was left paying everything. In 2016, I had to pay a U-Haul additional $200. The only reason I had to pay additional $200, that's when I moved back to Philly. I moved back to Philly, I told Deborah Spray that my mother should pay half of the moving costs. And because we didn't have money, so we just scrapped trying to move back to Philly. And I said, well, can you help give her, I need at least $600 towards the moving costs. So Deborah Spry, this is crazy. Deborah Spry dragged her feet when I have a moving out date to move back here to Philly into the house. She said she would give the money up on, it was like maybe on the 2nd or 3rd. She took additional 3 or 4 more days to give me the money. I couldn't return the U-Haul back to the rental until I had the money in full. So I had to hold on to the U-Haul until I was able to pay them fully. So they charged me additional, I don't know, it was about $200 more because it was like almost, it was $349, something like that for using the U-Haul. Then we, in 2011, there's something I just left out, I forgot. In 2011, mom lost her property through taxes that could have been paid. And Deborah Spry had refused. I had even written a letter and telling her that she has taxes to pay on her property. And they never bothered to follow up on that.
So
Until someone came and bought it, initially just paid for it and bought it.
can I ask you a question? Did you ever get a lawyer?
Say that again?
Did you ever hire a lawyer?
I went through 5 of them.
And they couldn't do anything?
Most of them wanted $4,500. I didn't have the money. I went to Subsidize, which was the Salvation Army. I went to them to do the accounting for my mother, and she worked with me in 2013, but never did anything because Deborah Spry kept telling her, they kept convincing her not to do the accounting. So she eventually didn't do it.
I do have a question. Actually, it's for Mr. Brooks. If you have a second to come to the witness table.
Yeah, so I went to about 4 or 5.
If I could, I want to ask the question here for Mr. Brooks, which pertains to you. And Ms. Thompson, your story is compelling. It's difficult. It's not good. I mean, it's a sad situation. And I'll let you finish in a moment, but while I have Mr. Brooks here, he's an attorney, not to say he should be your attorney, but what can, if you follow this sad story along, what can Ms. Thompson do to rid herself of this it seems to be very bad, guardian?
Well, first off, unfortunately, Ms. Thompson's story is something that we hear a lot.
Really?
Yes. And not to defend Ms. Spire, but there's a dearth of professional guardians. So there's maybe 3 or 4 now who are dealing in dozens and dozens of cases of people just like your mother, and it's impossible. I mean,
what is it?
It's impossible.
Impossible.
To manage that amount of people's lives. We would help her. We represent individuals in these cases. Unfortunately, the courts are very inclined to only dealing with lawyers. So if you had written to the court or asked the court for help, most likely that would have gone unanswered unless you had an attorney. And there's just not a lot of attorneys that will help individuals who are low income, except for us.
Okay.
We do routinely represent individuals just in these instances where people are being evicted because rents aren't being paid. So I'm sorry she didn't come to us, but this is certainly the type of case that we would have taken.
You would have taken this case had Ms. Thompson, 1, knew about it, and 2, gone to you.
Certainly, and we would have not charged her, of course, because we provide free legal services. And I'm more than willing to talk with her after the hearing today.
That would be very
That's why I stayed, because as soon as she started speaking, this is a story I've heard many
So can
times.
you summarize where are you now?
Can I what again?
Yes.
Summarize?
Summarize your testimony or the story. So, like, where are you now? That's a good
Oh,
question
okay.
from my colleague.
Okay, in 2016, we want me to start off where? Well, we was offered the property in 2000. Okay, when I was in court, that's the part I wanted to bring out. I did bring that out.
What's going on with you and your mom now?
It's just a stressful situation. Okay, the part right now is my mom don't have a will, and we can't get a will unless she has guardian. And if someone else has guardian, we can't obtain a will. And I have a policy and for, life policy for funeral and stuff, but I was able to get the policy started back in 2018. What's this, 19? Yeah, so I've been paying on that for about 2 years. And I was only able to pay on that consistently because I wasn't able to hold a payment, a complete full job to pay on her policy in case something happens, because she's about 83 years old. She's 83, and it's like talking to a brick wall when I'm talking to her. Oh, and I did go to other attorneys. I went to Cary, I went to Philadelphia Legal Service, Community Legal Services, LD Law. I went to a lot of them, and they all turned me down flat.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, if you had come to our this is a very discreet issue. I mean, and we only represent individuals who are subject to guardianship or have a guardian and don't want them, or having a guardian that's not doing what they do. So I'm certainly willing to talk with you after. I mean, that's why I stayed.
Well, it's very good. No, Mr. Brooks, I appreciate this. Appreciate coming back again, and
Yeah.
I think this may be helpful. And Mr. Brooks, a case similar to this, where would you appeal that to?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would meet with mom. I mean,
Sure.
and make sure that she does lack capacity, because sometimes people don't. But what you would do in a case like that, you would intervene in the court. You'd have to go to orphans court and file a petition.
That was actually my question.
File a petition, right. Oftentimes, we're able to reach out to the guardian and try to adjust and fix the problem. But
Okay.
if that problem is not fixable, we will file a petition with the court and ask for the guardian to be removed. The court resolves conflict by often appointing guardians as over the estate. Your guardian, I suspect, of the person, and then there's a guardian of the state. And that's just not tenable, especially with loved ones. But they prefer that rather than deal with mediation or deal with complex familial situations. And that's one of the things that needs to be addressed. So we would be more than willing to talk to Ms. Thompson about this. And to her, unfortunately, she's not alone.
Yeah.
I mean, we speak with people like this often.
I have a question. Now, if she didn't need a guardian, but they forced her into signing documents that she wasn't aware of. Now, back in '05, my mother might have been like, she wasn't probably taking her medicine, and that might have made them think she was incapacitated, but she has schizophrenia, and that can easily make you think that she's somewhere else. So when she's not taking her medication, she can be, you know, delusional and stuff like that. So she was not incapacitated. I do know that because I'm with her 24 hours, even when I was working. The reason why I moved her in the Sydney Hill Apartments right there at 22nd and Market is because I was working at 36 and Market at Children. And I was able to reach her every day. I got off from work. Whatever she needed, I was right there.
Right.
So now, while I'm working, they over here forcing her to sign documents. I can't. She called me and told me, but I couldn't get off from work. I can't just jump in when they say they doing this, they doing that to her. It's like a child at a facility, and they doing stuff that, you know, a mother would have went off. But by her being a senior, they figured they can do whatever they want. And then when I called PCA to ask them about this, they said everything is confidential. We can't talk to you about nothing.
Yeah.
But y'all signed you had her sign documentation, and she didn't even need a guardian because I'm there. And
Unfortunately, that's what occurs, is that PCA will get involved when someone's in crisis. Maybe they're not on their meds or something's not going on, and this is what happens. So I'm more than willing to speak with her, speak with you after, and give you my number.
It would take a lot of pressure off of me because I'm depressed so
Yeah,
bad.
this is very hard stuff.
Well, thank you all for testifying, and hopefully some good can come of all of this. I am certainly walking away very, very enlightened. And just one last call, if there's anyone else who would like to testify on behalf of 190089. And if not,
Well,
we'll see some fun.
I really appreciate you listening
wanna
to my
testify?
story. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Oh, okay.
Thank you both.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon, Councilman Taubenberger and Councilman Jones. This is very near
Well,
and
state your
dear to
name
me.
for the
Oh,
record.
Crystal
here.
Tan.
We have some
Crystal
formality,
Tan.
even though I know who you are.
My name is Crystal Tan, and I just want to, for the record, just point out a couple of general cases that have come to Councilman Jones's office. I'm going to start by saying, last year, the councilman came in this building on a Thursday, and he was on the elevator, and as he often does, he sees people, you know, welcome to City Hall, and these two gentlemen who were brothers explained to the councilman that they were here about their mother. Long story short, this guardianship thing, once is signed over by the court, they seem to have just a bit too much power. While those gentlemen were sitting here asking for help to find out what this guardian had written them to do with their mother, they literally called the police and had the mother removed and was placed in North Philadelphia Nursing Home. And there was nothing that these two gentlemen could do about that because the court had given the guardian the right to do that. I petition you guys to look into that. I mean, I'm scared to death. I'm like the councilman. I want to keep my kids happy. I don't want nobody calling. It seems like when you call the helpline, and this is what happened in this case. 2 years prior to them running into the councilman, their sister, who lives in North Carolina, called our office. She simply said to me, can you share the Philadelphia Corporation of Aging's number with me? I did. She wouldn't give me any detail. 2 years later, we find out the detail. And what's ironic is, the mother lived in a house with one of her sons. The house next door belonged to her oldest son. So that family was there together. They owned 2 adjoining homes. But that one phone call messed that entire family up. The guardian was appointed. There wasn't any family fine, is what I'm thinking, because she had a son next door that owned his own construction business. And that one phone call, as Nancy said, once you call the helpline, you're cut off. You don't know what's going to happen. Jackie Clay, who's on the list to testify today, got sick this morning. Jackie is the manager of one of our senior buildings in our district, and she emailed me her statement. I'm not going to read the whole statement, but the gist of the statement is there was a senior in her building who was appointed a guardian. Once he got the guardianship, he came to her and said to her, I will pay her rent, but I need you to go do her errands and her shopping and see that she gets to the doctor. She's a building manager, not her responsibility. So what Jackie told us happened was once management refused to assist his guardian with that, he had someone come and tell the lady she was going to the doctor. They've never seen the senior citizen again.
Wow.
Okay? I can't make
Very
these
sad.
things up. I just can't. And I mean, I have at least 6 or 7 cases where guardians have been appointed, and they're family members that care about their mothers, fathers, uncles, and aunts. And I just think there's not enough family time. Now, it's encouraging to see, number one, that the state and the federal government are looking into rules and regulations about guardianship. The one common thing that I think we should look at is that they claim that there's an audit report done on how money is spent yearly. We need to make sure that happens through our courts, because too many of the families are saying, now, here's the other common denominator I've found in my 5 years of being with the councilman. At least 4 families have widowers who have 6-digit bank accounts that wound up with guardians. And but the family, they want the family to take care of the person on a daily basis, but the courts have appointed somebody else to oversee their finances. And that's pretty scary, you know. Last month, a family came to us because they won $3.2 million in a lawsuit concerning their sister who was in a nursing home. Everybody in the family agreed that they wanted a guardian over the sister because all of the siblings were in their 80s. But these were sharp girls. They came down here, well, they came to Winfield, then they came down here, and when the guardian found out that the family was awarded $3.2 million, he then created a 3-page detailed financial report saying that they owed him like $10,000 to $15,000.
Wow.
And he petitioned a court 2 days after Christmas. The family was made aware of it, and then he turned around and took the petition away, but yet filed another one on January 4th, which meant that the family would not have had time, if they had not been on top of things, he would have gotten to her money.
That's very sad.
I'm just going to share that little bit with you because it's indicative of case after case after case, and it's very frustrating. I think that helpline at PCA, it's a good thing when it's needed, but we need to look into what their procedures are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Felicia Miller. But just to touch on a few things that Ms. Crystal said, we need to have some type of oversight and monitoring system locally, but especially in determining what makes someone incapacitated. Because of the cases that we've heard, we have people that said, well, I had a doctor who's never met me before, and he interviewed me for an hour, and I'm incapacitated. When she has a primary doctor that she's had for 24, 30 years that they're not consulting with. So there needs to be something that's in place to incorporate their primary doctors, to also, be involved with the hearing, and then however they're choosing these guardians, as it was touched on before. You can have a friend, and who knows if that friend is giving that judge a kickback or whoever is appointing them guardian. We're hearing a lot of stories of the same names being involved, the same guardians, the same judges. and that's becoming an issue with us, and we need to have something in place to be able to monitor this.
Yeah, I'm glad she brought that up. It does seem as though the abuse, the same type names come up. I think you asked a question earlier, Councilman Jones, where was the other lady? She's in Ireland. She moved to Ireland. The other thing, I don't know if you guys remember, last year, a woman who was under guardianship passed away, was buried, and her family was never informed until her son or grandson went to the nursing home looking for his grandmother, and she wasn't there, and they told her she passed away. The guardian buried her without even contacting the family. These type of things have to stop.
That's terrible.
Thank you.
Thank you both
Thank
very,
you.
very much.
Thank you. I want to thank you for being our canary in the coal mine when it comes to our seniors. When Crystal hears it, says it, we act on it. So thank you both for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much, and seeing no further witnesses or discussion, I will adjourn this meeting to the call, this hearing to the call of the chair. Thank you all very much.
Thanks,
God
Chair.
bless.